Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Today we take a look at the Genevieve series by Kim Newman, which is a large collection of stories more or less centered around a cool vampire lady named Genevieve. The stories are spread out over 4 books, of which 2 are full novels and 2 are anthology books, containing multiple short stories. These books are Drachenfels, Genevieve Undead, Beasts in Velvet, and Silver Nails. First of all, Drachenfels. Like I said in my full review, which I'll link in the description as well, this is an excellent 5-star book with a great mixture of horror, comedy, mystery and romance. This is the best book out of the 4, and if you're thinking about giving the series a go, then I definitely recommend checking this one out. Now before we move on to the 2 anthologies, let's first talk about Beasts in Velvet, as it is also a full novel. Beasts in Velvet tells the story of how a group of people from Eldorf try to catch a serial killer known as the Beast, and while it is technically a part of the Genevieve series, she only makes a brief cameo appearance in the book. One thing which Beasts in Velvet does really well is painting a good picture of what life in the city of the Empire is like, similar to what the Malice Darkblade books did for the Dark Elves. The writing style is very immersive, and by often switching between different perspectives and locations, we get a very nice meta image of the city. There's also very nice attention to detail, which contributes a lot to this feeling. While this is the main selling point of the novel in my opinion, it is still a cool and decently written crime novel, with some interesting characters and plot twists. The only thing that I didn't like very much was the ending, but I can't say much more about that without spoiling it. All in all, I still give this book 4 to 5 Jack the Rippers, but it should be noted that you can still easily skip this book if you want, as it is not relevant for the story of Genevieve. But I definitely do recommend it for all my fellow lore nerds who want to get a closer look at Imperial city life. Of course, like with all other books of this series, you should keep in mind that they are somewhat outdated and some of the details have been retconned over the years. Next, let's talk about the first anthology, Genevieve Undead. It contains 3 stories, Stageblood, The Cold Stark House and Unicorn Ivy. Stageblood functions as a direct sequel to the Drachenfels novel and also contains many characters from that novel. It is a fun story that plays on elements from Phantom of the Opera and The Strange Case of Jekyll and Hyde. I wouldn't say it is as good as Drachenfels, but it uses the same mixture of horror, romance and humor to great success. Sadly, it misses some of the mystery that made Drachenfels so good, but I'd still give it 5 out of 5 phantoms. The next story of Genevieve Undead is The Cold Stark House, which is a very weird story that I can't say much about without ruining it for you. This is the kind of story that you can only really read once, after which it will never be as interesting again. It is pretty weird, but I appreciate what it does. 4 to 5 French vampires. The final story from Genevieve Undead is Unicorn Ivory, a Warhammer parody of The Most Dangerous Game, and it follows our heroine as she is blackmailed into assassinating an important Empire noble. She therefore joins this unicorn hunting party, but just as in the other stories, things soon start to become more complicated, and again this story contains plenty of mysteries. Unicorn Ivory gets 5 out of 5 murderous unicorns. Overall, Genevieve Undead is still a very entertaining book that anyone who enjoyed Drachenfels will also enjoy. There's a nice amount of diversity between the stories which keeps them from becoming repetitive, but all of them still manage to share a certain atmosphere. This book might not be as good as Drachenfels, but I'm still giving it 5 out of 5 stars and I definitely recommend it. Then finally, the last book of the series, Silver Nails. Silver Nails contains 5 short stories, Red Thirst, No Gold in the Grey Mountains, The Ignorant Armies, The Warhawk and The Ibby the Fish Factor. Red Thirst is a short adventure story featuring Genevieve and a soldier named Vukatic, who escaped from a prison guard and accidentally discovered a big chaos conspiracy. This story also functions as a prequel for both Drachenfels and Beasts in Velvet and introduces many of the important characters of those books. Red Thirst is a pretty basic story with some interesting insights regarding Cathay. It's an okay read, however, there isn't really anything that stands out. The story is unsurprising and not very interesting, the characters are for the most part flat and it lacks the atmosphere of the rest of the Genevieve series. I'd give this book 3 to 5 Zinzin Acolytes. Then No Gold in the Grey Mountains. This story is only around 30 pages and it features Melissa from the Drachenfels novel. It's a cute little horror story with a somewhat predictable yet still satisfying ending. This story pulls off the creepy little girl trope quite well and the mind-altering effects of Drachenfels were a nice touch as well. 4 to 5 Spooky Kids. The third story of the book is The Ignorant Armies, and it tells the story of Johan and Vukatic, who travel to the Chaos Waste in order to save Johan's brother called Wolf. This story is in a way a prequel to Beasts in Velvet, as there are the same Johan and Wolf featured in that book. The Ignorant Armies is a decent quest story with some creepy elements. The main selling point of this story is that it shows you Newman's take on the Chaos Waste, which contain a wide variety of weird practices, phenomenons and characters. Again, this lore is a bit outdated, but I still think it's a cool thing to get a glimpse at some of the crazy shit that happens there. The downside of the story is that of course it fills the backstory of the characters that we already know from the other stories, which means that the ending is quite unsurprising. Still, it's a solid short story and it gets 4 to 5 crazy werewolves. Next up is The Warhawk, which is a sequel to the Beast in Velvet story, featuring Harold and Rosanna as they try to hunt down another pattern killer named the Warhawk, who kills people using an armed falcon. The Warhawk is another fun detective story with a pretty interesting serial killer. I got to admit, Newman knows how to write awesome quirky characters like no one else. In this case, the killer is obsessed with flying and has somewhat of a fetish for birds. You get some scenes written from his perspective, which give you a good image of what goes on in the head of this madman. Furthermore, the story has some cool twists and a cameo from 2 well-known fantasy characters. The big downside of the story is the ending, which felt very rushed and unsatisfying. Altogether, I give the Warhawk 4 to 5 soul wings. Then finally, the last story of the book and of the entire Genevieve series, the Ibby the Fish Factor. The Ibby the Fish Factor acts as a proper send-off to the characters of the series, as Detlef and Genevieve once again team up to thwart an evil scheme. It ties up all the loose ends that were left from the other stories, and it is filled with references to earlier characters and events. The story is again written with the same excellent mixture of horror, mystery, romance and humor that we saw in the other Detlef and Genevieve stories. This made it into a very entertaining read already, but there's 2 things that I'd like to highlight. First of all, we also get to see some more of Melissa, and this cunning elder vampire stuck in a little girl's body makes for quite a character. Not to mention that her interactions with Detlef really created some comedy gold. The other thing that I particularly liked about the novel was that we get to see some more about the lifestyle of the vampires in Eldorf and about the Crescent Moon. Newman does a good job in my opinion of writing the vampires in a crazy yet still believable sort of way. Oh yeah, and there's also cat girls. Anyway, this was my favorite story of the book and it definitely gets 5 out of 5 vampire bars. Altogether, I didn't like the Silver Nails anthology as much as Genevieve Undead, but the Ibby the Fish Factor is definitely a must read for fans of Genevieve. In a way, it's unfortunate that this last story wasn't part of Genevieve Undead, as the rest of Silver Nails is much more focused on the characters of Beasts in Velvet than on Genevieve. This forces you to buy the entire 4th book just so you can read the ending of the Genevieve saga, which is only about 100 pages long. Regardless, the other stories also had some cool elements and I'd still give this anthology 4 to 5 Kim Newmans. Now if you're interested in reading the series, there are 2 things that I'd like to mention. First of all, you can decide to only read the Genevieve stories on their own, and outside of some references you won't miss a whole lot. In this case you want to read Drachenfels, Genevieve Undead and the short story The Ibby the Fish Factor. Optionally, you can also read No Gold in the Grey Mountains to learn more about Melissa, and Red Turf to learn some more about Genevieve's adventures with Vukotic. You can also do the opposite and read the stories that I didn't mention in order to only read the saga of Johan, Harold and Rosanna. But this is something that I wouldn't really recommend. Finally, there are multiple reading orders that you could follow as the stories aren't published in chronological order. For simplicity's sake, I will list these and put them in a pinned comment.
If you liked this video, please consider subscribing and click ringing the bell to appease the Great Horned Rat. For more lore content, please check my main channel and leave any book recommendations in the comments down below. I gotta get back to reading the next book.